The world is a big place. This land speaks Italian. This land speaks German. This land speaks Japanese. This land speaks English. And this land, this big one over here, also mostly speaks English. So when localizing games, we can go, okay, this one gets the Italian one, this one gets the German one, that gets the Japanese one, and these two can get the English one because they both speak English. There's no need to make two different English versions. Right? Wrong! Stop assuming things. We've talked about this before. Let's start with a very basic thing you probably heard before. This is Yoshi's Topsy-Turvy for the Game Boy Advance, an American game. What do you think the European version is called? Of course, it's called Yoshi's Universal Gravitation. So what on earth happened here? Well, Yoshi's Universal Gravitation is actually the Japanese title. That's the original name for this game. But Nintendo of America said, we don't know what a Universal Gravitation is, but we know what a Topsy-Turvy is, and so they changed the name. And that happens a lot. Quite often in the 2000s era, NOE would have a very literal translation of the Japanese name, whereas NOA would go for something entirely different. So let's go through a bunch of different names and we'll get a bit more in depth into localization as a whole. But yeah, names are fun, let's do more names. The Wii's Animal Crossing City Folk was called Let's Go to the City in Europe. Trace Memory in America is called Another Code Here, which is a title I much prefer. Rhythm Heaven in America is called Rhythm Paradise in Europe for every single game. And for the Wii one, Rhythm Heaven Fever, we called that one Beat the Beat Rhythm Paradise. Catchy. Sometimes we just put another word on the end, so for Mario and Luigi Dream Team, we called it Dream Team Bros, just to specify that they're bros. We did that again for Paper Jam, and we also did it for the Mario Strikers games, Mario Strikers Charged Football, Mario Strikers Battle League Football. So what was Super Mario Strikers on the GameCube called? Well, that one was Mario Smash Football, that's just describing the game, I guess. Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon was called Luigi's Mansion 2 over here. Brain Age is Dr. Kawashima's Brain Training. Kirby Canvas Curse and Kirby and the Rainbow Curse were Kirby Power Paintbrush and Kirby and the Rainbow Paintbrush. In fact, Kirby's changed its name a ton. Kirby's Return to Dreamland was Kirby's Adventure Wii. Kirby Squeak Squad is Kirby Mouse Attack, which is funny because there's another game called Mass Attack. Kirby's Avalanche became Kirby's Ghost Trap, and Kirby Superstar became Kirby Fun Pack. When re-releasing Fun Pack and Adventure Wii as their deluxe versions on DS and Switch, they just completely avoided the European titles and went full American. Star Fox did this too, that was called Lilac Wars on 64, but when it came to 3DS, it became Star Fox 64 3D. I actually love the name Lilac Wars. I'm not so big on Star Wing, which was the Super Nintendo game because Star Fox couldn't have been used back then, but Lilac Wars, I think that's a good name. Clubhouse games were simply called 42 Worldwide Classics. I don't know why, we don't believe in clubhouses, I guess. We've also got a different name for Fire Emblem Awakening here. The logos are different, but that doesn't really show you how you read the name. So in America, it's Fire Emblem Awakening, whereas in Europe, it's Fire Emblem Awakening. This is a big deal, okay? Fatal Frame became Project Zero and still is to this very day. Pushmo, don't forget to buy Pushmo, the 3DS eShop's closing down. It was called Pull Blocks, and Full Blocks, and Full Blocks. Donkey Kong Barrel Blast was called Donkey Kong Jet Race. Style Savvy became Style Boutique. Nintendo Swap Notes was called Nintendo Letterbox. WarioWare Mega Micro Games was called WarioWare Minigame Mania. And also Wario Land Shake It became Wario Land The Shake Dimension. Fortune Street, that's Boom Street. The Layton games all had very different titles on DS. I actually much prefer the European ones. Find Me became Street Pass Quest. Mario Tennis Power Tour became Mario Power Tennis, which is very confusing because that's the exact same name as the GameCube game. I don't know why would they do that? And there's also a bunch more lesser examples, like how the first Dragon Quest localizations didn't have numbers because Europe just didn't get most Dragon Quest games. So our first one being 8 on PS2 was just called Dragon Quest Journey of the Cursed King, and then 4 on DS did the exact same as well. It wasn't until 5 that they started just adding numbers back. There's a bunch of funny non-Nintendo ones too, like how Ninja Gaiden was called Shadow Warriors. Contra was completely reskinned with robots and was called Probotector. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were called the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. Bully we called the Canis Canem Edit, because that's of course it's a much catchier name. It's Latin, that's how you get the big bucks. Illusion of Gaia, Illusion of Time. River City Ransom was called Street Gangs, and it goes on and on and on. Quite a common change is just adapting grammar, and that's usually throwing some U's in. In America, it's Sonic Colors, whereas in Europe, it's Sonic Colors. Using the extra letter, they actually represent one more wisp in the European box, being the speed wisp, the one that you use to boost. Yakka, that kind of wisp. So what I'm saying is this is the canon box art. However, sometimes publishers don't put U's in, and I'm looking at you, Nintendo. Paper Mario Color Splash. Where's our color? Where is it? Hang on. Hold the phone. Bear with me. Game Boy Color! This is Europe, Nintendo! Where's our color? This is inexcusable behavior. This must have messed up many poor European children. You could have just put a U in there. Could have put a U. But it's not just about the title and the box art. Many in-game contents change for this localization too. Sometimes it's very minor stuff, like grammar and U's. Other times it's some cultural stuff, like how Kirby's Epic Yarn has pants and trousers.
This grass feels funny, Kirby thought. It feels like pants.
This grass feels funny, Kirby thought. It feels like trousers.
And other times they change things around because Nintendo of Europe isn't just translating into English, they're translating into Spanish and Italian and German and French. So it often just makes sense to adapt the English one a bit more so it's easier to localize to the other languages too. So let's look at Wario Land: The Shake Dimension by Goodfeel. And you know what's kind of funny? Is they pull off the trousers thing again, like in Kirby's Epic Yarn. In the American one, they say long johns, but in the European one, it's just trousers. What's quite funny about this localization is while it appears to mostly be the same, there are quite a number of differences. Sometimes it's just grammar, like using an Oxford comma, but other times they just change the text in ways that I don't really understand. Like in the intro, Captain Syrup calls Wario handsome twice in the American version, but only once in the European version. Like, why'd you cut that handsome out? He needs to know he's a pretty boy. But one of the weirdest things is the items you collect throughout the game almost entirely have different text describing them, and oftentimes they're called different things too. Like in the American version, 6-week-old Curry says, "The Pirate Gallery cook recommends curry be aged properly before eating." But the European version says, "Any pirate chef will tell you that curry needs to be aged properly before eating." Mario Kart's a really funny one because sometimes they just change the names of courses a little bit. Mario Kart Wii doesn't do this a ton, that's more Mario Kart 7, but DK Summit in the American version is called DK Snowboard Cross in the European version. And 2 battle tracks are different too. So Chain Chomp Wheel in the American version is Chain Chomp Roulette in the European version, and Galaxy Coliseum in the American version is Galaxy Arena in the European version. There's also some different names for vehicles, and I found it funny how on the character select screen in the American version, it just says characters, whereas in the European version it says select character, which tells you what to do, whereas the American version's just stating that they are characters. But yeah, Mario Kart 7. Cheap Cheap Lagoon in America is called Cheap Cheap Cape in Europe. Woohoo Loop in America is called Woohoo Island Loop in Europe. Gotta specify it's the island. Music Park in America is called Melody Motorway in Europe, and one thing I don't like about that is they didn't actually update the flags in the course itself, so it still says Music Park even when playing on Melody Motorway. Rock Mountain is called Alpine Pass in Europe, and the Star Cup was just entirely relocalized, so Piranha Plant Slide became Piranha Plant Pipeway, Wario's Shipyard became Wario's Galleon, Neo Bowser City became Koopa City, that's a lame change, and Maku Woohoo became Woohoo Mountain Loop. The battle tracks were mostly safe, apart from Honeybee Hive in the American version became Honeybee House. Mario Kart 8 was generally much more consistent, but returning tracks maintained their names from previous localizations. So Music Park in the American version is still Melody Motorway in the European version, and that goes for any returning track. Otherwise, the changes for new tracks are only grammar. So Toad Harbor became Toad Harbor, Bone Dry Dunes became Bone Dry Dunes. Tiny change there. And that's pretty much it. Although one thing I must emphasize, this is very, very important because I think this is being forgotten. There's little trace of this. If you type in "I'm using motion controls" into Google, you'll find very little trace of what I'm about to talk about. But this will change the world. Even Google wants you to think it's "I'm using tilt controls," but that was an Americanization. Control F motion on Know Your Meme has 0 traces. What I'm trying to tell you is "I'm using tilt controls" was not used globally. You might be thinking, but John, I've played Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and even in the European version it says "I'm using tilt controls." Well, let's go back further than that. In the original, vanilla Mario Kart 8, things were different. Oh wait, the servers are down. Oh. To Nintendo! They always save the day. Look! Look! I'm using motion controls. I knew this was a thing. I knew I wasn't making things up. In the big part of the world, we were not boasting about using tilt controls. We were using motion controls. But then NOE thought they'd be clever and changed that for the Switch version because it became a meme to use tilt controls. But no, we know the origin, the roots. Motion controls, not tilt. Why have I talked about this more than anything else in the video? A funny change in Super Smash Bros., starting with 3DS and Wii U, was calling Duck Hunt Duo. I believe this is about the pronunciation of Duck Hunt. It can sound like something else. But yeah, we call them Duck Hunt Duo! But the real funny part of this also changed the Palutena's guidance a little bit. Take a listen.
I don't want to fight that cute dog.
Oh, you won't. You'll be fighting the dog and the duck.
So if I win, is duck on the menu for dinner?
Let's take things one step at a time, Pit. These two may seem like a duo, but they're actually a trio. Together, they're known as Duck Hunt.
So where's the third team member?
Let's take things one step at a time, Pit. These two might be called the Duck Hunt Duo, but in some ways, it's kind of like they're a trio.
What? You mean it's 3-on-1?
Listen, just be careful. You could get shot out of nowhere.
This is not Nintendo, but I want to shout it out. The Ape Escape games have entirely different dubs. So here in Europe, all the children are little British boys and girls, whereas in America, they are very American boys and girls.
Is Aki here? Huh? Hey, that's my pudding. Where's Aki? Oh? Hey, don't even... This is my creme caramel. The monkeys are all over town and on TV and everyone's... I can't explain it, but it's really bad.
So thus far, it's been relatively small stuff. However, there are 3 Nintendo games that I can think of that had entirely different English localizations. As in, they had 2 different teams from NOE and NOA that adapted the Japanese script in their own way. They're not based on each other. These are entirely different localization jobs. And that's nuts. So let's look at them. The first one is Advance Wars Days of Ruin in America, but here in Europe it's called Advance Wars Dark Conflict. And yeah, pretty much everything about the script is different, even the menu. The American one calls the main story a campaign, whereas the European one just calls it a story. But every single line is completely different. This does affect the tone quite a bit. I'd say the European one is quite a straight and literal translation of Japanese. Like when Ed's being attacked and the others come in to help him, in the European version they say, "Let's skip the introductions, fall back, and let us handle this." And Ed just says, "Okay, I understand," and then leaves. Whereas in the American version, it's skip the introductions, fall back, and let us handle this. And Will says, okay. I think the American version just feels a little bit more real. And yeah, their names have changed too. It's gone from Ed to Will, and O'Brien to Brenner. Curiously, the European version actually adapts the Japanese names. So really, it's the American script that's the outlier. However, I do think it's the better translation. It's just a bit more fun to read, a bit more lively. But either way, if you're a big fan of this game, I definitely recommend playing through it in a different translation. It's of course still adapting the Japanese text, so some lines are similar, but the tone differences are really interesting. But what about Splatoon? These days with Splatoon 3, everything is global. Splatfests are global, the scripts are global, but back with Splatoon 1, there was a lot more divide. Every regional Splatfest was different. Like for one Splatfest, America had pirates versus ninjas, whereas Europe had zombies versus ghosts. And for the same one, Japan had love versus money. That's not the same thing. But it's the actual dialogue itself that's the interesting part, especially in the single player. Let's use the final boss as a comparison. Splatoon's European translation is very similar to Advance Wars in that it takes itself a little bit more seriously. Like in America, you've got the line, "I'ma remix your face!" Where in Europe, it's just, "I will take back what's mine." There's also lines like this in America, "I'ma dump stomp you into oblivion," whereas in Europe, it's "time to put an end to you." This is another case of the European translation being a bit more loyal to Japanese, but it's also a case where I think the subtleties of English language are just more fun when you adapt them a bit more. However, that may not be true for the next game. This is a very famous one for localizations going against the source material, and that is The Legend of Zelda Triforce Heroes. This has long been an argument against adapting Japanese text during a localization and just doing a straight translation, and it's mostly for this line right here, which incorporates a dojin. In America it says, "Still, coming here has at least afforded me the rare chance to explore these ancient ruins. So ancient, such ruin." Whereas in Europe it says, and that may be precisely why the ancient ruins I encountered have been left undisturbed for me to explore. Now, I will say, I don't think the American translation ever really gets much worse than this, but there are definitely some significant changes. Like, look at the responses you can give here. The line is, that outfit is a bit, and your response in the European version can either be, or, it's great, isn't it? Whereas in the American version, the line is, it's your outfit, it's a bit, well, you know what I'm getting at, right? And the responses are, isn't it adorbs? And what's wrong? Just setting a very different tone for the game's style. But yeah, essentially every single line in this game is different, and outside of that use of a meme, I don't think the American version is absolutely terrible, but I do think the European version is much stronger in this regard. Also, one very weird change is in the American version, you're actually known as Triforce heroes, whereas in the European version, you're totem heroes. I think totem heroes makes more sense because they're symbolized in a totem. A Triforce heroes isn't a thing, it's just a recognizable title, and in Japanese it's also called totem heroes. But yeah, as the years have gone on, we've definitely become a lot more global. I don't necessarily think that's always for the good. NOE's localizations can be great, and I think they saw that when going from Xenoblade 1, which was done by NOE, to Xenoblade X, which was done by NOA. The franchise after that went back to the British dub, and I think that really is the identity of that series. And sometimes an American localization just isn't the way to go. All the title differences may not always make sense, but I'm fond of a few of them. As I said earlier, I like Lilac Wars, I prefer it to Star Fox 64. Maybe that's because that's all I've ever really known, but Star Fox 64 3D just felt weird. I want Lilac Wars 3D, goddammit! But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this rabbit hole of Nintendo localizations. Did I forget anything big? Let me know in the comments. Put a big one in there. Thank you for watching everyone, and I will catch you another time. Bye!